Welcome to ESG Decoded. I'm Amanda Hsieh, one of your podcast co-hosts, and today I have Graham Stewart, EVP at Fiber 52 with me. Graham is an expert in international textile and apparel production and has been working with world-class brands for many years. I'm very excited to have him on the podcast so we can talk about sustainable cotton production, sustainable fashion. Graham, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for inviting me. It's exciting to be on the pod.
Thank you so much for being my guest. I think most of us, we wear cotton in our t-shirts, in our jeans. We have it in our homes, perhaps in our sheets and our towels. We don't think a lot about perhaps what it took to come from a cotton plant to the t-shirt I'm wearing, for example, or the shirt I'm wearing. Because of your experience in the fashion industry, we'd love to get a quick overview of what it typically looks like to bring from cotton from the plant to a shirt. And I love to learn more about how Fiber 52 is making that all more sustainable.
Yeah, okay, Amanda, thanks. It's a good question. In the textile industry, taking raw cotton, usually what happens to it is it goes through a spinning phase. So there's machinery that cards and makes slivers, and then it becomes a yarn. And then it can go in different directions. It can go for weaving. It can be knitted in various forms, so like sweaters, pullovers, or T-shirts, you name it. On the weaving side, you've got, as you alluded to, you've got bed sheets, home furnishings, all sorts of things. So, cotton is a big deal in the textile world. As far as then processing it and where Fiber 52 fits in is that, let's take that cotton fabric, either knitted or woven. It needs to be bleached and dyed. The reason for that, the cotton's quite yellow or even brown, depending where it comes from. But in that process, in the industry, there's something called trash, which is just the vegetable matter that's in cotton naturally. The bleaching process actually removes that. Also, you're getting the brown shade or the yellowish shade into a nice white, so you can over-dye it, even, with bright colours. The industry tends, even if you're dyeing dark colours, still to go through that process to make sure that there's no residual vegetable matter there. And it's at that stage that Fiber 52 comes in, because we actually replace the heavy products, the heavy chemicals, or the heavy alkali that's involved in the bleaching process, and we replace those with natural products. And those natural products are much gentler, and they stop the degradation of the cotton, because with the heavy chemicals, which have been traditional for the last 80 years, there's not been much change from that point of view in cotton processing until now, I believe, where Fiber 52 is really a method to process cotton that replaces that traditional method. And even in some countries, there's legislation now for the heavy chemicals that are being used, that they are on lists that don't ban them, but in a way they do, because you're not allowed to use them. And, more and more countries are getting into that. And it's something that's going to happen in our fairly near future, I believe. And so we think we're ahead of the curve by using bioproducts to better treat cotton and not to degrade the cotton, because that in itself is a big issue.
So I'm thinking of, as far as the regulation you're mentioning, perhaps like EU REACH chemical regulations, and even if it's not specifically banned, maybe there's like warnings associated with it or something like that, and no one wants to put a warning label if you don't have to. And then, so my understanding is that with the kind of current, let's say, recipe mix of chemicals, not only is it pretty harsh chemicals, perhaps from an environmental or safety point of view, but it also negatively impacts the cotton fiber itself.
That's correct. It does. So, we can do tests, what we call burst tests, to just determine the strength of the cotton. So in our testing, we determine the strength of the cotton in its grey state, or its greyish, as it's called. And then we test it afterwards with traditional dyeing, and then with the fiber 52 method. And there's quite a big difference in strength because we're not really impacting on the cellulose in cotton. We're not degrading it. There are lots of other good side effects which I'd love to talk you through there, because right now fiber 52 is spreading as we speak around the world. Every day we're speaking today. Had two very interesting conversations, one with Italy, one with Sweden, on new processing machines and how we can save water, how we can save energy and so on. That's a daily occurrence for us now in that the word is out. Fortunately, people are really receptive to fiber 52 and the sustainable side of the process.
Yeah, tell us more. So besides being bio-based, and tell us what are some of the other benefits from a sustainability point of view.
Thanks, Amanda. What happens is, cotton uses a lot of water in process, and there's one big issue to begin with. We all know that water's a scarce resource, so we don't want to waste it in textiles if we can help it. And we say, when we quote figures, we always say up to, because there's lots of different machinery. So in certain machines, you get really, really good results. And that tends to be in the slightly newer machines, but even in the older ones, we get great results because we're using the same machinery that's always been used. You don't have to buy special machinery to use fiber 52. It's just that you can use the existing machinery. No need for investment. Really, no need to retrain anybody. It's just a case of substitution with these products versus the chemicals that are used. So in water, what happens is instead of using the heavy chemicals, in using these bioproducts, we actually speed up the process. So it's a shorter time, and that helps with less damage. But also that shorter time helps with using less energy. And in that case, what is happening is that we're kind of catalyzing the process naturally. And so it goes much quicker, but we can also use much lower temperatures too. So again, another energy saving. So we have water, energy, time, all being saved up to around 50% less with fiber 52 than traditional processing. And in some cases even better, particularly in Italy, one of our partners, they're saving around 75% of their water consumption by using fiber 52, which is a big deal.
Those are really big numbers, savings of, again, I understand the up to, depending on the machinery and how exactly you operate and all kind of caveats that come with all those things. But those are big numbers, around 50% just savings to maybe actually up to 75% in this case, and at the place in Italy. You must get the question, these numbers are too good to be true. Is this real?
Absolutely.
How do you go about showing or proving these numbers? Or, it just seems too good to be true, right? So we're all a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, it's too good to be true because, the traditional dyers are saying, well, you don't have enough alkali, you don't have this, you don't have that. Very skeptical to begin with. And you can imagine why, when it's been the similar process for so many years and it's so traditional. So we have to do trials. Those trials are there for the managers and the factory owners and so on, just to see for themselves. So we like to, I personally go in there. I can't do it all over the world, but certainly here in the States, I personally go and do the trials. And if we can't do that, then we're on a call like this where we can see each other and we can pretty much monitor the trial. And every one we've done, we're pretty much 100% successful. So, and there's a lot. I mean, we've done a lot of trials over the last year, and we didn't want to go out either and commercialize this properly until we knew that time after time after time this is going to work and it's repeatable. And all the questions that we get about, well, we're making a big replacement here. This is a new method. We've got to be able to trust it. We've got to make sure it works. We've got to make sure it's repeatable. So doing those trials is really important before you move on to the next stage, which is really commercial processing.
Did you work do any studies or lab tests or to really quantify the results in a very kind of rigorous way?
Absolutely, yeah. We work with NC State University, who have a fantastic lab. It's a comfort lab. It's called a comfort lab, and they've got some of the amazing machinery that can tell us just about everything that's going on. So we're able to take the traditional product and compare that in those laboratories and others. We work with a number of laboratories, but we test also. What might be interesting is at some point in this conversation we talk about the performance attributes, which are natural performance attributes for fiber 52, because we're finding also, and this is reasonably recently, we're finding that the performance of fiber 52 is quite surprising. So we're doing a lot of tests. We're actually making sure we're not degrading the cotton, making sure that things like pilling, when you get those
Mm-hmm.
little balls outside of your clothing, fiber 52 pills less, it sheds less, it's stronger, and therefore, there are those attributes, but there are other performance attributes that we're now discovering.
Tell me some more about like what do you mean?
Well, for instance, in sport, and warm weather, we actually thought that with fiber 52's natural attributes, we thought there was a cooling sensation. We were proven not wrong, but we were proven that it was a different sensation by this fantastic lab, in that they profiled fiber 52 against polyester, against normally produced or processed cotton. They can very carefully graph it. They actually kind of reproduce a human skin, and then there's a hot plate which is 35 degrees centigrade, so it's pretty much like body
Yeah.
temperature. Then they extrude moisture through the skin to the fabric. And what we find is that fiber 52 doesn't stick to the skin. Um,
Mm.
but we also knew that fiber 52 was quite hydrophobic or water resistant. We found that's not the case either, in that the vapor is actually going into the fiber, being absorbed and then re-released. So you have this constant comfort factor. So the graph just kind of flatlined, whereas the others go and crash because they're saturated, or they're stuck against the skin and cooling down very, very fast, which is not a great thing to do. We have a very strong comfort factor, but it's a natural one. In the past, to get that kind of sensation, chemicals like fluorocarbons have
Yeah.
been used,
Yeah.
which again have been phased out. This does all that naturally, without using topical solutions or adding that kind of chemical.
That's what I'm used to get to that effect as basically a topical chemical that makes it feel cooler or warmer, kind of adjust to body heat. But this is interesting that it's the cotton itself because of the treatment. So I live in Houston, Texas, where it's hot and humid all the time. So any kind of performance textile like that, it would be much appreciated. um,
Okay, so
I remember, prep call where you were talking about, as you're going around demoing and improving this technology to an industry that's, I think you said, has been using the same processes, the same recipes for decades, for maybe generations. You had to come with some really convincing information to get them to try it. I think you mentioned an LCA and also the work you did also with an Italian lab. Will you tell us more about the life cycle assessment and also the work in Italy that you did?
absolutely, Amanda. Yeah, with the life cycle analysis, we hired a very clever gentleman who is a PhD in textiles and polymer science. And he has a great background in working these very complicated LCAs out. So the life cycle analysis tells us, how much water we're saving, how much energy we're saving, what is our carbon emission. And again, we're using this word or sentence up to when we're doing this, but we've actually got comparative numbers from around the world. So at least we can see in different regions where power costs differently. Water obviously has a cost, and that's different also. And also the way that emissions are controlled. Again, we have to bring all that into consideration. So this whole work has taken around 6 months full time to get to that result. Moving on to Italy, what happened is in the town where we process is a historic textile town, a medieval textile town. Would you believe, where families have been consistent in their businesses for 400 years. And I was talking to a mill yesterday where a gentleman was saying, yeah, we're still going, and we've been here since 1859, and it's been in my family since 1859, and he was so delighted that, wow, because these guys are really into sustainability, and he said, I can't believe, we'd love to use this process. So there are some very receptive people out there, and they can see that, we can make a difference together. But what happened is one really nice dye house, they were dyeing garments with this process. They took the resultant garments to a beautiful lab, one of the most exalted textile labs in the world, where they deal with even luxury brands, and the luxury brands are looking, obviously, like other brands, are looking very carefully at what's happening in the environment and how it can be done better, because let's face it, there's a lot of pressure, ESG pressure there, that people are really starting to look at, and also there's legislation, and in Italy particularly, they're looking at feeling that legislation, and the results that came back were really interesting. We got really good fastnesses, because they're doubtful, like, well, it's such a short time when you're processing, are we going to get the fastnesses? Is it calling on a run? Is it going to be different? Of course, we've got to go through all that testing to make absolutely sure we don't have a problem. But we've also been able to use classes of dye stuff which you wouldn't expect to use with this kind of process, and get really good textile fastnesses, because they're cheaper dye stuffs that have been used for 50, 60 years. And the dyer was able to use those and get a really good costing, because they're using these nice cheap dye stuffs, but they're also using less water, less power, and so on, and they're costing that in now. And the laboratory that we're talking about, they've also asked us to do an LCA using all the numbers that we get in from the dye houses, from the processors in Italy, and then doing an LCA in Italy with those numbers, so everybody knows where they came from, and they can, absolutely feel it, because, oh yes, we did that. That's a big one for us. We're really looking forward to moving that along, and we're already in the process. So that's going to be interesting, and we will publish those figures.
I think the LCA, the life cycle assessment, is a powerful tool, especially when you have a new solution like this and you really want to be able to quantify the benefits to, as you mentioned, water, energy, and greenhouse gas emissions in a very convincing and rigorous way, but also a very thorough way. I think it's one of the most powerful tools out there. Graham, I want to ask you a little bit about, how did you end up in this space? Have you always worked in sustainability, or how did you
Yeah, good question. None of it was planned, let me tell you. But yeah, I grew up in a textile town where we made one of the biggest dye stuff producers in those days in the world. And, I lived where I lived. I looked onto the biggest dye stuff producer in the world, and my house was joined to a mill. So I kind of had to be in textiles. And yeah, I began life as a dyer when I was 15 years old, actually, but I started to study, did my degree over part-time, which was good, because I was able to go and study, but come back to the practical and start to use that. So being in that situation, I always looked at the factories that were producing dye stuffs, because that kind of affected my life in the atmosphere, just putting our washing outside. What happened to it, and the river that was like even 200 yards away, the color it would run, one day to the next. Then that was reality. Of course, that happened for a long number of years, but again, it got legislated against, and so I was interested. And then as a dyer, very much wanted to always improve the processes that we were using, try to use less water, try and use less chemicals. So for me, this has been a pretty long process. And I guess I got more and more into this. And as I was working around in dye houses, because I often had to do my own dyeing, and here in the States, I've done a lot of my own dyeing, and it's time consuming. And so when I was hanging around, I got into, buying my own cotton and looking at how I could improve the dyeing that was going on day to day, how I could make a difference. And it wasn't rocket science. I just gradually, by trial and error, got to where we are today. And now this is, we're full on commercialization right now. So it's great to be in this space at last.
Thank you for sharing your story. I think there's such an interest in sustainable fashion. Sometimes it's more focused on, after the consumer buys it and wears it. But I think it's as important to think about how it's produced and how we can make production more sustainable and tackle both ends of it. And it's exciting to hear about new solutions like Fiber 52 coming to the table to help the clothes that we wear or the home goods that we like to purchase more sustainable for all of us. Graham will make sure to link up the website to Fiber 52. So any listeners who are curious and want to learn more about this solution have an easy way of learning about it. But I want to thank you so much for being on the pod today and sharing this. This is fabulous.
Thank you. It's been good to be here. Thanks for all your good questions. And thank you very much indeed. I've enjoyed it.